When will Iran's 0 hour to attack Israel be? Is Iran's threat of attack serious, or has it been forced to back down? Iranian officials still speak of a direct attack on Israel in the near future, further increasing anxiety among Israelis. Could this retaliatory attack, as the Iranians claim, spark a larger war in the region? What role will the United States play? Will it only defend Israel, or will it be forced to launch an attack? If the United States gets involved, how will the leaders of Russia and China react? Will they enter the fray? As tensions in the region escalate, the shadow of a major war looms over the historical and sacred lands of the Middle East. Militant groups in the region, from Hamas in Gaza to Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen, are launching coordinated attacks against Israel with Iran's support. Rockets, missiles, and drones continue to be fired from the north and south toward Israeli cities, leaving no moment of peace. However, a major war in the Middle East would be something very different from these daily skirmishes. The radars of the Israeli military and its allies detect movements in the sky, as thousands of missiles and drones appear on the radar screens of American bases, heading toward Israel. Now, the Israeli Defense Forces can also see these fiery and destructive birds on their radars. By giving a like and subscribing this channel, you are helping an independent analytical media to continue its journey. In the cities of Tel Aviv, Haifa, and many other Israeli cities and towns, warning sirens sound, and people rush to shelters. Defensive layers prepare to defend the skies. The Iron Dome, Israel's advanced missile defense system, along with other defense systems on French, British, and American warships, are ready to fire defensive missiles. The Israeli Defense Forces strive to fend off these attacks, but the sheer volume and precision of some missiles inflict heavy damage on critical infrastructure and residential areas. In this situation, Israel's Security Cabinet is in an emergency session and decides on a decisive response. The Israeli Air Force launches extensive attacks on the infrastructure and bases of resistance groups in Gaza and Lebanon. In Gaza, explosions shake the region, and buildings collapse one after another. In Lebanon, Hezbollah's bases are targeted, and the group threatens severe retaliation. Meanwhile, Iran, as the main supporter of these groups, takes action. Tehran declares once again that Israel's attacks will not go unanswered. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, declaring full alert, targets more ballistic missiles at military bases and major cities in Israel. Simultaneously, Iran's basic forces and army are deployed to the western borders of the country, ready to respond to any situation. Iran's attacks on Israel are not limited to missiles. Cyber attacks on Israel's critical infrastructure, including the power grid, banks, and media, pose serious challenges to the country. At the same time, Iran's naval activities in the Persian Gulf increase, and the threat to close the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most critical oil routes, disrupts global markets. In Israel, the people live in fear and anxiety. The cities of Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Beersheba are constantly anticipating the next attacks. Israeli soldiers are stationed at the borders, ready to defend their country. The Israeli government calls for support and solidarity from the international community, and the United States, as Israel's primary ally, deploys warships to the region. The international community, worried about the spread of this conflict, begins efforts to mediate and stop the violence. The United Nations and European countries send diplomatic messages and hold urgent meetings to try to de-escalate the situation. But the determination of the parties to continue the war renders short-term ceasefires ineffective. Meanwhile, neighboring Arab countries cannot remain neutral. Some support the Palestinians, while others, worried about Iran's influence, side with Israel. This all-out war challenges not only regional security but also global stability. Global powers like the United States and Russia, each supporting their allies, push the region to the brink of a world war. Warships and military aircraft move in the Mediterranean and the Persian Gulf, and at any moment, a small incident could ignite a major conflict. Will this war be endless? Is there hope for peace? Can diplomacy and dialogue prevent this humanitarian disaster? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain, history will never forget how a region was set ablaze and the human and material costs that came with it. This scenario presents a dark and tense image of a possible future, but it can also serve as a warning for more serious efforts toward peace and diplomacy. Now more than ever, there is a need for dialogue and peaceful solutions to prevent such a catastrophe. In Tehran, the officials of the Islamic Republic openly support resistance groups. Iran's supreme leader, in a public speech, emphasizes that Islamic resistance is stronger than ever today, and any Israeli aggression will be met with a decisive response. He adds, Israel and its supporters must understand that the era of dominance is over. Iran's foreign minister, in an official statement, condemns Israel's attacks and calls on the international community to stop these illegal aggressions. In an interview with international media, he emphasizes that Iran stands by the Palestinian people and the resistance and will not tolerate any aggression against Muslim lands. Iranian media, with extensive coverage of these developments, analyze Iran's military power and its role in the region. In these reports, some analysts emphasize that Iran will not only respond to any attack but will also use its military and regional capabilities to show its enemies that this region is not a place for dominance. Israeli officials consider these attacks an existential threat to the security and survival of their country. The Israeli Prime Minister, in a televised speech, calls on the people to resist and unite. He emphasizes that Israel will never bow to these threats and will use all its military and political capacities to defend its people. The Israeli military, in a press conference, releases images and videos of its precise attacks on Hamas and Hezbollah bases, stating, "We will respond decisively and immediately to any attack. Our enemies must understand that any aggression against Israel will have severe consequences." Israeli media like Haaretz and Yedioth Ahronoth also analyzed this situation, warning that this war could turn into a prolonged crisis. Some Israeli military experts in these media stress that Iran is increasing its influence in the region, and this is a serious threat to Israel's security. We must respond forcefully, but we must also not lose sight of diplomacy. In Washington, the U.S. government quickly takes a stance. The U.S. president, in an official statement, declares that Israel has the right to defend itself. We stand with Israel and will continue our close cooperation with this country to respond to regional threats. The Pentagon announces that U.S. forces in the Middle East are on alert, and more warships are being deployed to the region. The U.S. Secretary of Defense, in a press conference, emphasizes that any threat to our allies in the region will be met with a swift and decisive response from the United States. American media like the New York Times and the Washington Post also provide extensive coverage of these developments. In these outlets, political analysts examine the possible consequences of this conflict, emphasizing that while support for Israel is consistent in U.S. foreign policy, the potential consequences of a large-scale conflict in the Middle East must be carefully considered. This war could impact global markets, energy security, and even the upcoming U.S. elections.